Hey guys, how's it going? This is Natinator, and welcome back to the final installment of the Turn It Off Creepypasta series. I feel like this story managed to hit on all of the high points of the horror genre from start to finish. I just hope you guys are enjoying it as much as I did. Now, as always, turn out the lights, get comfortable, and let the story be finished. We both heard it, and the blood fell in our veins. It came from the tent, a slow, strained rasp of a voice that sounded like a parrot copying a new word. The sound clicked across my skin and crept into my ears. The light flicked off with a click that was too loud. Chris grabbed my shoulder, and I clenched my fists closed, painfully tight. We stood there in complete darkness. I didn't want to move, and I didn't want to stay. My brain fought for control as my legs waited for a decision, rooted in place. We breathed shallow, quiet breaths, blackness pressing on our eyes like water. Sweat ran down my neck. I couldn't see the tent. "Chris," something said. "Turn it off." My stomach flipped inside out as the thing in the tent played with my words. I quickly grabbed Chris's hand, yanking him in the opposite direction. I ran like I never had before, Chris's legs thudding alternately with mine. The sprint continued for about a minute. We lost ourselves as we ran through the darkness. I forgot where we were, and I couldn't see what was in front of my face. I ran head-on into a tree, and my forehead struck its side with a sickening, hollow knock. Sparks lit up inside my eyes as I choked back the pain. It hurt so much I couldn't breathe. Chris tried to pull me on, but I buckled to the floor on my knees and threw up. As I collapsed onto my back, my head went numb. Chris lifted me up. "Please, don't stop. Please, please," he begged. I couldn't reply. "Please, please keep going." I forced my legs to take my weight as I locked my knees upright, leaning on Chris. My body felt empty, and a little blood rolled down my forehead and into my brow. I wiped it away as I tried to grasp the situation again, but the pain was too much. "Wait, I can't," I begged. Just wait. We stood together in the inky woods, but we could have been anywhere. I couldn't see Chris as he huddled next to me. It didn't feel like darkness. It felt like someone had wrapped my head in a blanket. Neither of us said a word as we waited, but our breathing was loud, and I wondered from what distance it could be heard. Reality began to return to me, and the pain was now just about bearable. I straightened up, grasping at what was happening. The pins of fear sank into me a second time, and I started counting in my head. 1 minute passed without any sound in the world. The wind was dead, and the birds might be too. Another minute went by. I continued counting. 3 minutes. We were still alone. Was it even looking for us? I reached for Chris's arm in the dark. He jumped when I touched it, but I steadied him with the other. He was still holding the lantern. Good. We had light on our side. Now if only we could use it. I went over the events hurriedly in my mind. The lantern was hanging from a tree. We got out of the tent, then couldn't find our way home. By the time we returned to the tent, something was in it. But then, why did it take the lantern and do nothing while we slept? If it was sheer luck that we were alone when we were trying to get the lantern, I wondered just how small the possibility was of us getting a second chance. I stayed silent for a moment, and then whispered as best I could. Chris, we need to turn on the lantern. We need to fucking get away from here. We can make a run for your house, but we need to see. No, please. We have to stay here. Chris tried to whisper too. We can wait for morning if we have to. You can't turn it on. I could hear in his voice that a sob was breaking through. Just keep quiet. You fucking have to. Please. I parted my lips to try again, but as I did, I heard something. A very faint clicking sound from somewhere in the dark. It was almost inaudible, but it was there. An irregular, stuttering, clicking sound. It sounded like fingernails on a wooden table, and it was moving. It came from in front of us. I was sure of it. A steady click, clack, click filled my ears as we tried to gauge the distance. It was drawing closer. Click, click, clack. It stopped. I was glad for the first time in my life that I couldn't see what was waiting in the dark. Perhaps that meant we were also hidden. As my thoughts fired off in every direction, I gave the thing in the darkness the image of the cat-headed woman, and it terrified me. I was just waiting to hear that meow, but my ears were met with something else. Chris. I tensed my throat and tried not to cry. Chris. It said his name twice, and I cupped my hand over my mouth. The horrible, scraping dialogue sounded a few steps away. The words were said oddly, with no meaning behind them. They were just sounds that this thing had picked up and was now using them to catch us out in the dark. Chris let go of my hand, and I heard his foot plant softly on the grass behind him as he prepared to run. Don't you dare, I tried to project into his mind. Don't you make a sound. Chris, please. It sounded so wrong, drawn out, like a door slowly opening. Chris let out a whimper as it called him. I froze and waited for something, anything to happen. There was a long silence, and I held my breath for as long as I could. I couldn't wait anymore. Very slowly, I reached out to Chris and put my hand on his shoulder. And very carefully, we both lifted our feet and managed to step without making a sound. We backed away slowly from the voice and didn't stop moving, but ever so carefully. So slowly. I didn't care how long it would take us to get somewhere. If it took us an hour every step, we were going to get out. Chris backed into a tree and gasped audibly. The clicking started up immediately. Click, click, clack, click. It rolled on, consistently moving toward us. I didn't know what to do. All I could think of was to screw my eyes shut and try not to scream. As we stood there, the clicking came to a stop, an arm's length away from where we stood. Silence. Chris, turn it on, please. Fear took over. Chris switched on the light and tore off in the other direction without looking behind him. I wheeled in place and held that lantern in my sight like nothing else existed. We didn't dare look at the thing, but we could hear it. Our footsteps thudded on the grass, and the thing pursued us with a tap, 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 tap. Now, like scurrying little claws on hard earth. As I ran desperately to catch up to the light, the sound suddenly rose up behind me and over our heads in the trees. This wasn't happening. It was going to drop down on us. Turn! I screamed. I didn't care anymore. If we were going to get out of here with our lives, we were going to have to run for them. We suddenly changed course. The tapping stopped for a moment, long enough for us to gain a few feet, before it came in our direction again. My legs were cramping horribly, and Chris was gasping hard. We couldn't keep this up. Where were we? I saw the light from the lantern come to an abrupt halt up ahead. I didn't have time to stop, and braced myself to thump into Chris. But the light passed beneath my feet. He had dropped the lantern. I turned my head and watched it recede into the darkness. It was immediately too far for me to go back. The thing would be on me in a second. Chris! I was crying and wiping tears from my cheeks as I ran, preparing for my face to connect with the tree at any moment. Keep going! I heard Chris from up ahead. There's a light! My vision was bleary from tears, but I could see it. An orange glow hanging in the air in the distance. Another one? What was happening? I wanted to scream at him to avoid it, but I realized it was a street light. My legs felt like I was running through water, but I pushed them harder with a goal in sight. Gradually and painfully as the light drew closer, as did the clicking. This thing could move like nothing I knew. I saw Chris's figure pass underneath the streetlight, and then he was gone again. Don't stop! I yelled as I approached the edge of the forest, and my legs adjusted as the forest floor gave way to solid footing. I could see a row of more streetlights leading off to the right, and Chris's figure was passing regularly underneath each. When I was sure I was completely out of the trees, I didn't stop. I ran under several more streetlights, putting as much distance as I could manage between us and the edge of the woods. I realized after a while that the clicking had stopped. I needed to see we were okay. I turned my head and looked back along the row of lights, keeping my gaze on the first light. My pace slowed as the pain in my head and legs came back. There was silence once more, and the lights revealed an empty pathway. I jogged on and kept my eyes on the glow, expecting to see something at any minute. But it lit up nothing but concrete and the edge of the road. Is it there? The question pulsed in my mind over and over. As I turned my head to continue catching up to Chris, I caught sight of something pass under the first street light. An almighty shock went through me as my fears were confirmed. I let out a cry and picked up the pace once more, sprinting between the lights. The image was burned into my mind. I hardly caught a glimpse of the thing, but it was white and massive. It almost brushed the streetlight as it went under it. It had a long, upright body full of kinks, like it had just unfolded itself, and that's all I was able to tell. It must have had a face and limbs, but I didn't have enough time to see. I didn't look again. The path gave way to more lights, and soon I could see the glow of windows in some houses either side of the road. I recognized where we were, close to my house by some miracle. A little further, and we would be there. "My house!" I yelled, and Chris listened, turning left onto a side street and dashing down. With panic on my side, I reached the turning and looked down the road to see Chris jumping the fence into my garden. "Hurry up!" I heard him scream. Reaching the fence, I planted my hands on top, hoisting myself over and shredding my elbows in the process. My ankles stung as I thudded into the garden and sprinted toward the kitchen door. Chris stepped inside, gasping for air, as I fumbled the key into the lock and wrenched it sideways. We both flew into the kitchen and slammed the door behind us. I locked it from the inside, and we both sprinted upstairs into the bathroom, locking it behind us. "What was that?" I managed to say in a panicked whisper, wondering if it would get in. "Did you see it?" "No." Chris crouched under the window, letting tears roll. "Shit! It was so tall. It was... I couldn't... Don't tell me." Chris cut me off. I mulled it over again and again as we sat there, minutes slowly ticking by into hours. My head was fizzing all the while, and I could still hear its voice. That disgusting voice. My elbows and forearms were sticky with blood, and we both looked at the floor, the occasional sob coming from the two of us. Our hearts banged in our chests, and we spent the night that way. Light streamed in from the window, but we didn't unlock the bathroom door until noon. We crept downstairs. The kitchen door was still locked, and nothing was inside the house. I looked out of the living room window. Another perfect day. No people walked by, but the sprinklers were on, and I could hear birds again. It helped to calm our nerves. "That tent can stay there," I said at last. "Yeah," Chris agreed. We stayed in the living room, with the TV off all day. We didn't know what to do, and talked about if we should call the police or something. The day crawled by as we tried to rake our thoughts together and think of what to do next. But all that went through my mind was what had just happened, not what we should be doing. By the time it was dark at around 9 p.m, the phone rang. It was Chris's parents, asking if I had seen him, as they were getting worried. They had just got back from out of town. I let them know he was okay, and asked if they could come and pick us both up from my house, because something had happened. They wanted to know what, but I said we'd both tell them when they got here. They said they'd be here soon. Relief washed over us, as adults were on their way to make everything all right. They would believe us. We didn't lie about these things. Even if they were skeptical, they'd at least believe that some dangerous animal was in the forest, and that was good enough for us. I went into the kitchen to get some juice from the fridge, and I realized I hadn't had a drink all day. I could hear water dripping in the sink, so I turned the faucet tighter and glugged some juice. As I headed toward the living room, the water started to tap again. I flicked the light on and realized it wasn't coming from the sink, or anywhere in the room for that matter. It sounded like it was coming from further away. I looked out into the garden and could just about see a fuzzy, tall silhouette leaning up against the back fence in the dark. Actually, the tapping sounded more like clicking. The figure slowly moved away from the fence and clicked across the grass towards the house. "Please,"